congregational singing, and we're going to talk about techniques that help improve congregational singing through effective hymn playing. I also brought a few printouts of some hymns that I will hand out later, and that will be helpful when I do some demonstrations. The overview of this session is the power of congregational singing. And as we all know, worship would be less exciting if it didn't include music, and certainly congregational singing is one of the best tools that we have to inspire congregations to, believe in the faith and to give money and to be excited about being there, right? So all these things are very important, and you as leaders of music do an extremely important job in the ministry of the church. And some clergy people tend to find that threatening a little bit, but most of them understand the value of music and therefore the great inspiring role that you all have as music leaders. So, like it or not, congregational singing is the cornerstone of worship, and it fosters community, it expresses faith, and it deepens spiritual engagement. So as church musicians, our role extends beyond simply playing notes. We are called to lead, to inspire, and to enable the congregation to sing with confidence and joy. Effective hymn playing is a powerful tool in achieving this. And there are many ways that we can do this adequately, and then there are a few time-tested ways that we could optimize that opportunity to inspire, to bring joy, and enhance engagement. So the goal of this session is to equip you with practical techniques and insights to help church musicians enhance congregational singing through thoughtful and skilled hymn playing. And so what is thoughtful and skilled hymn playing? Well, it is intelligent playing, and by that I mean we need to understand what the function of hymns and the composition of hymns are. And hymns are basically, as you've seen, and in fact I will have Josh hand out these printouts now. This probably should do. Hymns are essentially chordal, and these hymns actually come from the 1940 hymnal, which is in the public domain now, so I don't feel bad about making copies for you all. But these are hymns that are well known, and as you notice, these hymns are very chordal, and quarter note, mostly quarter notes, sometimes eighth notes. Some hymns that are very effective also have dotted 8/16 rhythms, sometimes they'll have syncopation. These are rhythms that a congregation of untrained musicians can handle and actually can find very exciting. We'll talk and maybe even sing through these hymns a little bit later. Why does hymn playing matter? Well, the musician doesn't just accompany. They lead the singing. They provide a clear harmonic and rhythmic foundation. Without that rhythmic foundation, people won't feel confident to sing. The piano or the organ is basically the invisible choir, right? It's also, in the case of an organ, it's an orchestra in the box. But basically, the instrument is the congregation's primary vocal support. So it needs to be strong, it needs to be clear, and it needs to be encouraging. The common challenges in congregational singing are usually a lack of confidence, a sense of hesitation. Also, I would say 99.9% of congregants show up to a service without having warmed up vocally, right? So I would say that's the first challenge is, they only had their morning coffee, right? So here they are. And then when they start singing, if they do sing, oftentimes the tempo can drag, right? And it's like they're going faster than they want. The coffee is just starting to kick in. It hasn't really quite gotten there. That also can lead to pitch issues. So sometimes people tend to usually sing flat, if anything. Rarely do they sing sharp, but that happens. Also, it can be uninspired monotone singing, you know, and then they see the text, but you know, they are not really emotionally connected to it, right? And so, how do we address these challenges? Well, I'll talk about that. But let's keep talking about the elements of the hymn, right? For example, if we look at the one that's called number 396, the Church's One Foundation. Well, basically, obviously the overwhelming rhythm in this hymn is quarter notes, right? Occasionally a few dotted quarter eighth. So obviously that pulse, right? It's the heartbeat of the hymn. So we have to establish a clear and consistent tempo. And so in the prelude or introduction, we have to get a clear, unambiguous tempo and character. We must avoid rushing. We also must avoid dragging. And so oftentimes I recommend, and I have myself done this, especially when I am presented with a new hymn that I haven't played before, that I haven't heard before. I use the metronome because usually when I encounter a new hymn, I find it beautiful. I say, oh wow, that's so great. But that speaks to the right side of my brain, which is the one that experiences joy and pleasure and, you know, of emotion and all that. But my rhythm, my tempo can fluctuate a lot, and I can learn a hymn wrong. And sometimes I will accelerate in exciting moments of the hymn, and I will decelerate in less interesting moments of the hymn. So there's nothing wrong about using a metronome when you're writing a new hymn, or when you're practicing your hymn. Just to keep in check and just make you aware of where you might deviate from that very strong, clear, unambiguous tempo. So it's just about internalizing the accurate tempo, right? So I think a metronome is always a friend. And if you don't have a metronome, I'm sure your smartphone can find an app for that. I have myself a metronome on here because I travel, and so that's one less thing to carry with me. And so I actually have 2 metronome apps. And you know, they do the trick. Right? So metronome app is my friend. And then also while playing a hymn, it's important to breathe with the congregation, or to predict where the congregation is going to need to breathe. That also affects the tempo that you're going to take. So if you see the opening line, the top line of that hymn, right? There's no comma, there's no nothing for the first 4 measures, right? So the church is one foundation, is Jesus Christ her Lord. Right? I sang that in one breath. I have vocal training, but a lot of people do not have vocal training. So in order for them to sing this in one breath, right? You want to take that at a tempo that they can, therefore, handle. Right? So you don't want to do it. The church is one foundation. Because inevitably they're going to need to breathe there. Or worse, they're going to But we've all heard it, right? It happens. And it doesn't matter whether you're taking the right tempo or not. You know, people will breathe in the strangest places sometimes, including choir members, right? So let's think about that tempo and practice different tempos and see where you need to breathe. Can you handle 4 measures in one breath or not? And therefore, how does that impact the tempo that you're going to pick? Another technique is to drive the rhythm. Basically, you have to emphasize the main beats without being rigid, right? That's what I mean by strong beat, right? So it would be, the church is one foundation, is Jesus Christ the Lord. Right? It needs to be very precise, very strong, very clear. Like you're basically leading it, so you can't deviate, you can't let a major 6 Jesus Christ, slow anything down. If people slow down, you must keep going. And I'll talk about some techniques to make sure that people, even if they slow down, they catch up and they don't slow down. We'll talk more about that. And then it's important to, as you drive the rhythm, to play with the forward motion, with a sense of direction, propelling the hymn forward, right, always, and to avoid a sticky or heavy feel, right? So it should be, dark or anything like that. It should have very clear forward motion. And that will impact subliminally the congregation and also the choir in singing. It's important to maintain clarity in the bass line. The bass line is crucial for rhythmic and harmonic grounding. Why is that? I'm not sure, because technically the human ear hears the uppermost frequencies the best, right? So people always hear the melody, and that is what they notice first. But the bass, actually, the foundation of the chord, is actually what subliminally and subconsciously people actually listen to for rhythm, right? And so we're going to talk a lot about the bass line today, because that bass line is going to be needs to be clear and articulated in order to keep driving tempo and making the instrument slow down. On a piano, for example, in that hymn, right? The tendency might want to be to just kind of connect all the notes that are repeated. So in the bass line, for example, right? That unfortunately is going to lead to a lot of dragging in the congregation. What I propose instead is to have a very defined, clear, articulated rhythm in the bass, right? Now, I also, you might have noticed, I played the octave below. I added the 16-foot, right, of the bass line, which helps even more drive that rhythm forward, right? Going on. The other, so B, phrasing and articulation, shaping the musical line. We must think vocally, and I call it singing with the hands. And so I want you to imagine that you're singing the melody and the inner voices through your hands as you play. That therefore will inform where you want to breathe naturally and where to breathe and where to lift, given that sort of a little bit of time. And so, you might even write in your own copy some breath marks so that visually, if you have a lot going on around you or people are moving, candles and incense, and who knows what bells and whistles might be happening while you're doing a hymn. So having a visual something in your score will make sure that you do it at the right time. Now, not every verse has a breath at the same spot, right? For example, in that hymn, on the top line, the first verse has no breath in that top line, but the second verse does, right, at the comma. So you might put the breath just in the middle verse, say in red ink, or something that visually, sticks out at you. So you incorporate subtle pauses and breath marks, or lifts, where singers would naturally breathe, keeping in mind, of course, that a congregation of untrained singers will take a little longer to breathe, right? So you might want to lift a little early, so that subliminally they know, oh, I need to breathe. But then you keep that rhythm going by coming back in time. And continue with the phrase. Always make sure that the breath is very clear and that everything that you do lifts at the same time, right? The melody, the inner voices, and the bass line. So clear articulation, obviously, as I just demonstrated, articulation is very important. It's important to connect the melody, because the melody is what people listen to for pitch. So it's important to encourage a smooth and connected melody line to guide the voices. But the bass and the inner voices need to be crisp, depending on, of course, on the hymn, on the text, on the mood of that hymn. But I usually recommend to articulate inner voices and bass line to provide clarity and rhythmic drive. And especially in the rhythmic hymns. And a good example is Joy to the World. I'm sorry, well, that one too, but the hymn to joy, right? Sometimes I've heard this hymn accompanied like this. And that leads to a lot of dragging, whereas you want something more like. Right? That obviously will drive people to, it will energize them, and you're going to think, oh, there's rhythm here going on, and so that is what I mean by crisp bass and inner voice articulation. And then on the organ, it's important to avoid excessive pedal. Sometimes, I've talked about that already in another session, that, when you've got big reeds in the pedal, and 32-foot reed especially, right, it's fun to use them, and it rumbles, and it's exciting, but it can unfortunately overwhelm everything, and because the longest require more air to fill, they also don't lift as quickly, so they can drag on and they can muddy the rhythm. So it's best to keep the 32-foot reeds until, frankly, the very last chord of a triumphant hymn. Earlier than that, it can really undo the rest of the work that you're doing in the inner parts and the bass line otherwise. So basically, that's what I mean by avoiding excessive pedal. So dynamics and registration / voicing. It's important to add color and support. The dynamic shaping is important to consider, because we don't want to overwhelm. We don't want to play loud. We want to play loud enough to support, but not so loud as to drown out the congregation always, right? Yesterday morning, when we were rehearsing for the opening service, Randall Bradley basically asked one of the staff members of the conference, how was the balance for the brass, the organ, the piano, and all that? And everyone said in unison, "Oh, not enough organ," and that was the best compliment anyone could have told me. If had they told me, "Oh, way too much organ," that would have, I would have had to keep things in check. So that was really helpful, because then I knew that I needed to bring everything up a level, but I certainly didn't want to drown out anyone. And so that's the fine line, and it's important maybe to ask someone, a trusted friend or a trusted colleague in your congregation or in your church, to give you honest feedback about how to balance. Was something about that hymn too much, right? Because when it gets too much, people stop singing. Yeah, it's called sensory overload, right? It's just like, wow. So keeping that in check is important. And it's a good idea to use varying dynamics for emphasis. I definitely like having a lot of stops on the swell box, for example, which is usually under expression, having the box closed so that I can open it gradually, which helps create a nice change, a nice evolution of sound, if you will, and that always keeps it fresh for a congregation to stay engaged, to stay interested in the text of the hymn, and it prevents routine or the same old sound throughout all the verses, right? So these subtle dynamic shifts will highlight important phrases and help you build intensity. The meaning of the text is huge, right? It guides dynamic choices, such as fortissimo for praise or pianissimo for contemplation, right? So read through every verse of the hymn, maybe even write out dynamics that you want to achieve, and therefore plan out your registrations accordingly. For example, in the other hymn on the handout, hymn 282, "Praise my soul, the King of Heaven." For example, the third verse, right, would be the more contemplative verse. Why? Because the text says, "Father, like he tends us and spares us, well our feeble frame he knows. In his hand he gently bears us, but then rescues us from all our foes." It leads back to the refrain, Alleluia. So that actually is when you can start crescendoing, when the text says rescues us from all our foes, and then, right? So he rescues us, but then he strengthens us, right? And as you sing that, you can start opening the swell, make it bigger, or increase the dynamic in the piano. And that can all be very effective text painting. Let's see, yes. So now on the organ and the piano, what are effective registrations? The foundation stops, that's what one would start with, the principals and the flutes for clarity and warmth. Usually, depending on the spirit of the hymn, if it's a strong hymn, you might solo out the melody in your introduction with a trumpet, or if it's a really big closing hymn, maybe with a festival trumpet if you have one, but accompanied well enough with all the other manuals coupled together just to give a really strong sense of, okay, let's bring this home. If it's a general hymn that isn't particularly fiery, then just all the principles, 8 and 4 in the manuals coupled to the grade, 16 and 8 in the pedal should do a nice job to establish tempo, the spirit of the hymn, and get people ready to sing the first verse. Building gradually. So oftentimes, unless there's a verse like this third verse in Praise My Lord, the King of Heaven, usually verses will start building excitement and intensity. So you can add stops thoughtfully to build sound. With the only caution that it's best to avoid adding too many stops too quickly, right? So that you can really save the big stops for the last verse, which is usually going to be the more triumphant one. Right? It's good to add reed stops for drive. Reeds can add brilliance and rhythmic drive, especially on the final verses. So then you might bring on the great reed if it's not too strong, or the positive or choir reeds. Open the boxes. Make sure that reedy sound is on, because that is going to add that brilliance and rhythmic drive and excitement. I also urge people to avoid overly bright or thin registrations. Bright registrations, to my ear, involve mixtures. Mixtures usually on the swell tend to be okay. They are not too big. They usually just sit at the very top of the texture that you create. So they usually add the right amount of shimmer. It might be enough to just have that one mixture. Sometimes the positive or choir mixture is very, very bright. It all depends on the instrument. Just use your best judgment. Does it just add a little brightness, or does it sound like nails on a blackboard? Be very careful with the great mixtures. They're great for organ repertoire, but sometimes they can be way too strident, right? So be very careful about those that can create an overly bright sound. Sometimes registrations can be too thin if, say, you don't have enough 8-foot foundations and 4-foot foundations, or if you add a mixture but you don't have a 16-foot underneath to also counterbalance the brightness, right? So you don't want an overly bright, but also neither a too thin registration. So keep those things in mind as you register. On the piano, it's good to use full, rich chords, especially since the piano is all you have. And so, for example, if you get to the final verse of the Church's Small Foundation, you might want to, instead of bang this, you might want to. They're having full chords in the left hand, and maybe even adding notes that belong to that chord will help make it sound like, oh my goodness, this piano sounds like 3 pianos, right? And so those are tricks to bear in mind. Yes, octaves in the bass line. In the bass line, I use that throughout when I play on the piano. It's sort of like having an organ with a 16-foot stop in the pedal, right? That basically makes that bass ever clearer. Make sure it's not a muddy stop. It should probably be a principal. Use a Borden if you have one as well, or sub bass, but make sure that there's a principal in there somewhere, because that will clarify the rhythm and the articulation in the bass line. On the piano, arpeggiation is good, especially in the more subdued verses. For example, in Praise My Soul, the King of Heaven, that third verse there, that is more introspective, right? You might the gentle arpeggiation suggests smooth sounds, gentle attack to each note. You don't want to do it too slowly because then you lose all sense of rhythm, right? You don't want to. You're like, okay, I don't know where the beat is. I can't say that. So don't do too much of everything, right? Like in everything, moderation is everything. Okay, then the use of sustained pedal, that's a danger at the piano. Exactly, yeah, you're nodding your head, and you probably have heard that where, some people, they press it down and they leave it on there, right? So and it can be very beautiful to them, but it only works for them. So just, and in some wet rooms that are very reverberant, right? You might get away with not using the pedal at all, especially if people start slowing down. They're not keeping up with the tempo. Just keep it even short and crisp, like so. It's a very reverberant room, and here obviously we want a little bit, but not too much, right? So, harmonic support and embellishment, it's about enriching the experience. So, it's important to have a solid harmonic foundation and to provide that. So, we want to ensure that the chord changes are precise and audible, and we want to voice the chords so that the important melodic and harmonic notes are clear. So we just need to basically know that sometimes this chord needs to be very clearly because it changes and suddenly it builds tension. We don't want to play another chord and correct ourselves in the middle. When we make a mistake, let's make sure that it sounds intentional and that it doesn't alter our rhythm, right? We've all been there. I'm there all the time. All right, then strategic embellishment, make sure that it's tasteful and purposeful. It's okay to add passing tones or suspensions because they can add color and interest without distracting. So for example, let's see, what is a good, if we look at the Church's Bond Foundation, the bass line is very connected, but for example, we have, notes in the bass there, it doesn't detract away from the rhythm or from the harmonic content, and that's okay. And we can also add suspensions, as I mentioned. So, for example, let me keep going, and then I'm going to add a suspension in the alto part. Right? But I keep it in rhythm, and it adds a little, ooh, that's special, and it adds emphasis to the text.
How did you do that with the suspension? What chord was that?
So I
when
just
did the alto?
in the alto, I basically played the 9, 8.
Okay.
So I went, basically the alto line is. It's not straight, but I did.
Okay. Gotcha.
But I kept the melody intact, the bass
Right.
intact. You don't want to change the entire chord,
Right.
because it might distract and make people go, whoa, where we're going now, what's happening? Unless you're outright reharmonizing the final verse, which can be also very effective, as long as people know that you're reharmonizing the whole thing, right? I wouldn't want to go, people go like, wait, where do we go from here? Why did it go sad all of a sudden, right? So you want to do subtle things, right? Maybe just one voice.
Can it be done sometimes in the tenor line?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Let's see what we've done in the tenor line. Oh, well, the next line, for example. Do you want on the last note? Isn't that satisfying?
Yes,
Like,
yes.
ah, finally.
Yes.
Finally, I can be expressive, right? Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Yeah, and in fact, you can look for places ahead of time, right, on your own practice time, for places where you can do extra practice, passing notes or suspensions, right? Those are very effective at making your playing sound very expressive. But just make sure you keep that tempo steady anyway, right?
It's okay to alter the chord a little bit if you're just like adding a minor 6 chord that falls into the harmony, but it's just a little added 6th in the chord.
Absolutely. Now you're talking harmonic progression, and that is excellent. Sometimes, we want to just change a chord and just do a random chord, and then it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't resolve correctly. But yes, if you do a minor 6 chord that goes to a 4 chord, then you got a plan. You're going somewhere, and that actually can be a very exciting tool. And in fact, you can then completely reharmonize. And for example, in this hymn, if we want to sing maybe the first verse, shall we all sing the first verse together? And I'm going to completely reharmonize it. So basically, and go.
And your congregation has to know you and know you're going to do that. And a lot of times, a new congregation will get lost in that. I mean, some were trying to sing parts with that right there, and there's no way you can sing parts with that.
No, and in fact, of course, it has to be understood that the tradition would be that you sing parts in the middle verses, but the closing verse is in unison, and then you let the organist, have fun.
You know each other, yes. The
Exactly.
congregation and the word must know each other.
Right, yeah, and that's part of the tradition that you establish over time, right? But yeah, that can be really, really exciting, right? When you certainly go harmonically where no one expected you to go, but it goes somewhere and it knows how to resolve like that. So
our choir, when they have 4 verses, they sing unison on 1 and 4, and then parts on 2 and 3. The congregation's pretty much on the through, but then the 4th one is when I always do my reforms because they kind of they're on unison, and I tell the pianist just play octaves.
yeah.
I'm free to do whatever I want to do.
Brilliant.
She plays melody and octaves.
Oh, okay. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. What's also effective is sometimes to modulate up a half step.
I don't like that.
Sure.
It's too high.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly. So a trick for that actually is to start a half step lower, and then modulate to the right key. And then if it's too high, it's like, what?
Well, that's a whole other issue because most hymns are too high. For the
Well,
congregation to sing, for the congregation.
that's
most
right.
hymns are
Yeah,
too
I know
high.
exactly. Yeah, I know. And so that happens. And so sometimes you can transpose things down and then bring them up a half step, but still being lower than anything above C. Frankly, can be really challenging for a congregation. All right. So well-played descant or reharmony on the final verse can lift the entire congregation. And you could also improvise a short interlude in between verses. Sometimes that can be useful, especially if you're going to modulate during that interlude. That can bring excitement. Oh my Americans with modulating, they call it, a key change. That will drive excitement and sometimes make them forget how high it is. Because like, I can get it, I can get that head. But we always want to avoid over elaboration, right? We don't want to go so crazy in our reharmonizations that no one knows where we're going or what's happening. So our goal is basically to support and not to showcase our virtuosity, right? And simplicity often serves the hymn text best. All right, so how do we prepare for effective hymn playing? Well, we must know that hymn, and we should sing through every hymn on our own time to get to know the hymn text and also the tune very intimately. That can also lead then to figuring out where you could add suspensions, passing tones, etc. It's important to understand the text because the lyrics dictate the mood, the tempo, and the dynamic shaping. Right? So, and then we should analyze the harmony so that we understand potential places to deviate from that and get back on track. And also it makes us aware of potentially challenging harmonic passages so that we can train the choir in rehearsal to navigate, secondary dominant, right, which has a different set of accidentals or whatnot. And
something I liked yesterday was when on the third verse of When I Survey, went to the minor.
that's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's extremely effective. Exactly. And that's especially applicable to, frankly, a major hymn, for example, the third verse, or the fourth verse. The fourth verse, mid-toil and tribulation, and hunger for water, right? You have keeping the melody intact, but you're flipping the script from a major key to a minor key with a lot of tension, which is particularly, useful in mid-toil and tribulations and tumult of war, right? I mean, that's when you can make it very exciting using very simple tools like that. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out yesterday. That was fun.
A quick question.
Sure.
Last night when we sang that with When I Survey the Wondrous Cross, it was last night, wasn't it? Wasn't
Yes.
earlier in the day for the first. It was in the.
No, it was for the hymn
It
singing.
was the hymn sing.
Yeah.
Did the organist or pianist modulate to get to that minor?
No, they just played it in minor.
Okay, that's
For
what I
example,
thought.
I didn't modulate it here,
Yes,
right?
sir.
I keep it, this thing is an E flat major, and I went for the relative minor. Right?
Okay.
So, yeah, you mentioned the sixth chord earlier, right? So I went from major to it's minor six, not E flat. So, and then it's important to practice smart, right? We can all just spend a lot of time practicing, but if we don't practice smart with a clear goal in mind, we can accomplish very little. So it's always good to practice slowly, and I know that's not fun. That's not fun. But ideas at least great ideas come to me very slowly. And I like to say that I understand quickly after long explanations, because that's in doing things slowly that our imagination takes over and creativity really blossoms, right? So practicing hymns slowly is a gold mine. That's where you discover the potential in harmony, in writing out your own descant, in suspensions and passing tones. So that's also helpful in managing difficult passages and boost our accuracy. Right? I don't like to do it. It feels like a grudge, but practicing hands separately is also an essential when you're not playing something right and you keep hitting the wrong note. Just break it down. take away the hand that works and work with the hand that doesn't, and then until that hand figures it out, it will save you so much time later, and you'll sound better for it. So it's good to isolate hands like that to ensure accuracy and independence. Always focus on the problem areas, right? The ones that you keep, or that even a choir keeps messing up. Just don't start over at the beginning. Go right for where the issue is happening. It's best not to just play through. It's best to target, identify, and work on the weaknesses. And then again, a metronome. It's just your friend. It helps make sure that you stay truly in time. That without that, people won't feel the confidence to sing along. Record yourself. What an invaluable tool. The microphone doesn't lie. It's the only person that you can really truly trust, and every one of these now can record you in very high fidelity, right? And so if you think that you're doing something but it actually doesn't come through, then you probably should look at that spot better, because the recording actually hears very objectively what you do. And so, it's great. It's a great way to check what you're doing. And it gives you confidence as well, that then once you listen to yourself, you fixed what you noticed, then you know you fixed it. And that gives you confidence, which helps you then give confidence to the congregation and to the choir. It's good to listen to other people. I'm very lucky that in New York, there are so many top musicians in the city, and whenever I happen to have a Sunday afternoon off from my cathedral duties, I will go and listen to someone else in the city that happens to have a service, and I learn so much from other people, how they use the organ. Our imagination is only limited by our imagination, right? So it's great to learn from other colleagues in town and people that we respect. But it's also important to know your instrument. So understand the stops on the organ that you play, and how they combine together. And on the piano, be aware of its resonance and its dynamic capabilities. If you play on a piano that is mic'd, see if you can find out. Maybe put your smartphone out in the room during practice, right? And see how the miking actually works. Does it enhance the treble, or does it enhance the bass, right? Is there something that ends up being lopsided in terms of balance, right? If so, you most likely will not be able to change the miking or the opinion of the audio video person, but what you can control is how much bass you give or treble you give, right? And so that's a helpful tool. If you can achieve that ideal balance for yourself, then most likely the congregation will feel that better balance, and also then sing with more confidence. So beyond the notes, how do we lead from the bench? Well, a confident musician inspires confidence in the congregation, right? So if you do all that work that we just talked about, doing recording yourself, practicing with a metronome, identifying, potential for reharmonization, passing tones and suspensions and modulations or complete reharmonizations and very steady tempo, the congregation will feel that and will automatically, without knowing why, they will just sing with more confidence. They will join in. I've always been told that Catholics don't sing or can't sing. And every Catholic church that I've had a job in, people have just sung their hearts out. And even a lot of them are surprised. I mean, the last two jobs I've had in New York City, one of them, my current one at the cathedral, but I don't quite have so much one-on-one rapport with the congregation because we're like 100 feet above them. But occasionally when I walk through, people, mostly tourists, come say, "Oh, this was so much fun. I love singing the hymns today." Or at the previous church that I was at, the parish church, then I was very much, a lot of tourists also who would come to New York and say, at my church, I don't know why we don't sing, but here I felt so inspired, thank you, and I'm like, oh, thank you. You will notice a change if you really implement all of these preemptive steps. It really will boost your singing, and people will not know why. And they might not thank you right away. They might not notice right away. They'll just gonna kind of get to it, and but you will notice. You will notice when people are singing more confidently. Subtle cues. Yes, I think it's important to plan a slight lift before an entrance, right? So that you finish your introduction, lift, and people will feel that, and they will, they will feel a slight pause when you do a breath, right? Like, for example, you can't express, especially at the end of that first line in the Church's Law Foundation, you can't expect to do. They're not going to breathe that quickly in the congregation, right? So you want to do 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. And it's okay to compromise there and give them time to breathe, because a lot of congregants don't know to breathe from the diaphragm, and then keep going. They go, and so just give them time. Don't make them feel like they're late, right? People don't like feeling like they're late. So that will go a long way. So you plan that extra little pause and you practice that, and then they get used to you being with them and supporting them, right? We're there to support them and lead them. Then engage with the congregation, as strange as it may sound, but making eye contact with the congregation. Obviously, you don't want to stare at them like a stalker. You just want but you just want to. I call it spraying the room, right? And basically, make yourself look at people, and with a smile, and it goes a long way at making them feel connected to you and trusting you that you're a human like they are, right? You're not this hoity-toity musician. You are another human, and that goes a long way. If appropriate, obviously you don't want to look at people like during a sermon and distract them from listening to the pastor, right? That's not when you want to do that. But like during greeting time, or right before a hymn, or right after, you with your eyes you can express, wow, that's good. Something like that. People will appreciate that. And then flexibility is important. One of the most important skills in frankly any field is to be adaptable and flexible. And it's a good reminder for me as well, because I am not an adaptable person. I have to remind myself to go with the flow and all of that. And how is that relevant to us? As well, sometimes we maybe had a little too much coffee and we started a little too fast, and obviously the congregation can't keep up. So in that case, it's best to adapt a little bit, especially if every trick you try, like articulating the bass line and everything, and still too fast, then give in. It's okay. No one will die. And that's what I tell myself, right? I'm just sharing with you what I go through mentally in those things. But it's also important to adjust dynamics. If the congregation is struggling, or if it is soaring, it all depends on what you need to do. Like if the congregation gets really excited, then give more organ, obviously. And then I like to remind church musicians that their role is really vital and impactful. And so I just want to take a moment to celebrate us, what we do, and to realize that we extremely important role in our ministries. And yes, sometimes we're told the organ was too loud, the organ was too soft, the prelude was too long, the postlude was way too fast, or something, right? We get these strange pieces of feedback, but without us, the worship would be really dreary. So, we add so much, and without realizing, probably people keep coming back to the services because of the work you do. So, pat yourself on the back, and hopefully what we discussed today gives you tools that will be helpful to you and to boost your work. So I put in some, I recommended some books, also some organizations have really helpful resources and tutorials for the kind of work that we do. And so I invite you to check these out. But I would like to open the floor to you all and see if you have other questions about what I talked about. And did you raise your hand?
Well, in my head, I didn't something I thought about earlier is how congregations want to retard it at every verse. Maybe the last one would be doing it, but I mean, the tendency is to slow down at the end of every verse. It's just, you gotta keep.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't like to do that.
Right. Well, it is also. I think it's a normal tendency from almost everyone. Choirs also sometimes want to do that, and because they're not watching, you know, they are not aware. And I think it's a good practice to keep that tempo all the way through the verses and only slow down at the end of the final verse. I think timing between verses is also very important. I didn't talk about this in here because it's not quite, it doesn't quite fit the title of today's session. But for example, in the hymn, praise my soul, the King of Jesus. When you finish that verse, 1, 2, 1, 2. Right? If you always keep that same steady tempo in the silences, people will eventually stop slowing down and keep going. I think if you're conducting, I think it's important to, in a hymn, not be too, decorative and all that. I think it's important to indicate a strong ictus, right? This is not a beautiful Mozart or Brahms requiem moment, right? It's actually a hymn, so it needs to have that bounce and rhythm, right? And I think when you're conducting a hymn, just having a bright ictus like that. And people will hopefully eventually stop slowing down if they see you conducting like that. You can always train a choir ahead of time to not slow down. A congregation you can't, but if the choir is strong and steady, the congregation will follow.
Something else I've heard other people do on this call is that David's hard thing in the introduction. When the congregation doesn't know what the tempo is going to be when you start the word.
Yeah, that's, in my book, that's a no-no, because that confuses everyone. And so in fact, if you really, if you keep that pulse, underlying pulse steady, so if you don't slow down and you keep that rhythm, it doesn't feel unmusical, but it removes that unnecessary slowdown that then confuses everyone. And even in the silences, keeping the pulse steady, that is everything. So great points that you brought up. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, when you talk about lifting, like to give the congregation breath, they don't take a breath in time. They don't really think to do that a lot of times. And my church is it's like, acoustically, it's very, very good. It's just like a big barn. It's just a big barn. And it took me like 6 months to figure out, to listen to my sound out there as to what they were hearing. And so I do follow a music director, and he likes to keep it 1, 2, 5 right there. The choir knows to breathe during that quarter rest,
Sure.
but the congregation is, and so I kind of learned to cut the growing sound off just before he does, to give them just that extra little bit of time out there, to take that breath.
That's exactly what I was going to suggest.
Yeah.
You're doing the right thing.
Just before I know he's going to give the cutoff, I'll release.
Great.
And that gives him that little extra time.
Exactly. That's good. It's better to release early so that people at least get the sense, okay, breath time.
It's time, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that then they can keep coming back in time if the choir director will not compromise there. That's very good.
I think a lot of it's just acoustics too, really, like you said,
principles in the pedal that therefore shut off quickly. That way, people sense that, okay, that the bass is my guide. Good. All right. Well, if there's nothing further, then we're all done. Thank you so much for coming this morning, and it's great to share with you some, and to also hear the challenges that you encounter in your respective churches. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Are you enjoying it?